Steve Robinson, president of the AGC during 2001. I was working for Knife River Corporation at the time, a subsidiary of Montana Dakota Utility. Lonnie Cargyle was just before me, and then Tom Stewart followed me. Well, the biggest issue would have been determination that the executive director wasn't meeting the needs of the membership. It occurred during my term. And what we had done was brought all the general contractors together when it came to my attention that several of the general contractors were not very receptive to the director. And so we met down at Winston Cachet conference room and had a discussion and took a vote of confidence or no confidence, and it came through about 75% no confidence. And so I sat down with Ken Dunham and made a determination to let him go at that point in time. Well, several. One, following up on the termination of Ken Dunham, we began the search for a new director for the AGC. And I remember talking to an individual that had worked with me prior to my term there. I had been working with Acme Materials and Construction Company for, 24, 25 years or so. And unexpectedly, it was sold to our competitor, Central Premix. Both of them were corporate owned by international corporations. And that's when I made the switch over to Knife River. But at the time, Denny Sweeney was a operations manager for me. And I had a conversation with him about perhaps suggesting to Tom Stewart, the following director, of making Wayne Brokaw submit his name as a director. And it came through, and I remember having a discussion, and actually off the table a little bit here, but you, Jen, were key on that, because we sat down with the general contractors at that point about the candidates for it. And Dan Murphy was pushing pretty hard for a buddy of his that was a former city council member. And I remember you, Jen, making the statement that persuaded a number of the general contractors to go with Wayne Brokaw on it. So you had a key role in bringing Wayne in on it. So anyways, but one of the main items during the time of my presidency was the North Spokane Freeway. And I remember the actual first shovel of dirt being dug for the freeway. Me as the president of the AGC, along with other key individuals, the governor and so forth, did a photo op, and it began the North Spokane corridor. And we began a significant effort on trying to pursue funding for that. And that continued on for years afterwards. AGC was a key element in seeking the funding of it. We recognized probably back in 2011, 2012, that the community needed to be brought together to persuade the legislature to go for it. And I was president of the Spokane Good Roads Association at the time, and made the determination that Greater Spokane Incorporated needed to get some assistance in persuading the legislators to provide full funding. And Wayne Brokaw, AGC, we asked Wayne if he could be involved in it, and the three organizations, Spokane Good Roads, AGC, and Greater Spokane Incorporated, make a massive effort to go for complete funding. And I remember attending both the government affairs meeting, asking AGC to allow Wayne to contribute his time to it, and the board of directors. And fortunately, they agreed to go and pursue it, and Wayne just took off like a rocket and went very hard after pursuing funding for that, and ended up being very successful on it. During that time, the economy had been gaining some strength. It had slowed a little bit in the 90s, if I remember correctly, just kind of chugged along. And then in 2001, it began picking up more strength and continued on that strength for the next several years afterwards. During 2001, we also had the issues developing with union and non-union companies. We had began the apprenticeship program, which developed into some difficulties with the unions and the AGC. And one of the key elements in a discussion with Ken Dunham on that, because he was very proud of the apprenticeship program, and rightfully so. Unfortunately, he went and testified before a Senate committee in Washington, D.C., and that caused a lot of the union members and the unions to be upset in pursuing non-union apprenticeship programs. And that, again, was another key element in Ken's eventual dismissal. Well, I think we discussed the fact that the director at that point in time changed, and then the search for a new director began. And once Wayne Brokaw was brought on, the staff had been very dedicated and followed the lines of the previous director. And there was conflict that developed, and during that process of the following year, I think a number of staff members were changed, and it became a much stronger, much more positive atmosphere in the AGC. Originally, I graduated from Washington State University in accounting and business, 2 degrees, and then I went to work for a CPA firm called Coopers & Lybrand, and had worked there for 3 or 4 years. And then one of my clients, Don Herrick with Acme Concrete, called me up and wanted me to come to work for him as a CFO. And so I made the determination that Don's a great guy, and the organization's a very strong organization, and went to work for Don, and continued working there under Don's leadership for, it was probably 8 or 9 years. And Don was planning on a transition within the family, but that didn't work out, and ended up selling the organization to a corporate entity. And at that point in time, I became president of the company, and that's how effectively I got involved in construction. Well, I mentioned the fact that the North Spokane corridor had just gotten underway at that point in time. Acme Concrete was involved in concrete paving and so forth. So through the years, we did a number of freeways and airport runways throughout 13 western states. We were pre-qualified to bid work, and I believe Acme Concrete paving is still pre-qualified in a number of western states concerning that. So that were the major projects, but during my construction career, a lot of the freeways, I remember we had the conversation that 2/3 of the runways at Salt Lake International were paved by Acme at that time. So we were spread all over the West concerning that, but we also had portable asphalt paving that we did throughout the Inland Northwest area. And we also began and created the North Spokane operations for Acme Concrete. And supplied ready-mix concrete and gravel through major projects throughout the Inland Empire. From an industry change standpoint, we saw the change of major suppliers in our field of ready-mix concrete and aggregates and so forth change from family ownership, where it had been passed through generations and so forth to corporate ownership, and saw some of the other contractors change also into ownership by major organizations. We also saw some strengthening of non-union organizations at that point in time. I remember negotiating the contracts with the unions in late 1999, and our concerns weren't in wages and benefits. It was more the working rules and the ability to make the working rules work within the organizations. And we saw some growth of non-union companies develop because of that. We belong to, well, number one, we belonged to the AGC, had been for years prior to this. And we recognize the fact that the AGC was a unification organization that could provide substantial influence within the local, state, and federal government to pursue needs both on a regulatory standpoint and a funding standpoint for funding projects within the areas that we operated in. We are the AGC.